Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the AI and Democracy Challenges and Opportunities Conference. This event is supervised by Department of Foresight and Innovation Policies, co-hosted by Taiwan AI Center of Excellence and Research Institute for Democracy, Society, and Emerging Technology. May I once again remind you that our conference hall is not allowed with any food or drinks, but water is fine. So if you need to drink or eat, please proceed to the outside hallway or lobby. AI has changed a lot of ways of our lives and industries, and whether in the different fields such as education, transportation, law, culture, and medicine. Therefore, the relationship between AI and democracy deserves more attention. Under the rapid development trend of AI, what kind of challenges will we face and how can we respond to and create AI that meets the needs of democratization? So before we begin today's conference, I'd like to first invite Professor Zhihong Cai, Chair of Taiwan AICOE, for opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Cai. Welcome.
Our distinguished guest, Professor Ron Lessig, all our participants, and I also mentioned highlight this event is co-hosted by not AICOE but also the Research Center of Democracy, Technology, Democracy, and Society.
That's okay, it's okay.
Okay, so it's pretty long.
Yeah.
I'll try to figure out a better acronym for you.
Okay.
This is a very important opportunity for those who are interested in the future progress, especially the governance and regulation of AI. We will have a direct. In this event, we not only have the lecture from Professor Larrick talking about the AI and democracy. We also have a panel from our distinguished expert. In Taiwan, we have at the cabinet level. Okay, we have promoted the research and the use of AI for several years. Actually, we are entering the second stage of our AI action plan. When our AI technology and application is widespread into different sectors of our society, we also aware that we are handling emerging technology that's have a high potential and high risk to get bad influence to the society if that's not well guided. Okay, but how and at what degree it should be guided or regulated is also a hot debate issue. It's debatable, and at the cabinet level, NSTC has just completed a draft. We call it a guideline, a draft guideline for the ministry about the use of generative AI. Okay, and the spirit behind that is that we should make use of this good technology, but be aware of all kinds of risk, the cybersecurity risk, the reliability risk, the copyright, the all kinds of potential unstable situations you may encounter when make use of this system. So again, this is a very important opportunity for us to have this discussion and have better understanding of how we can handle, better embrace this new technology. And again, I express my sincere welcome to Professor Lessig. Let's have a big hand for Professor Lessig.
Thank you very much, Professor Tsai. Please remain on the stage as we would like to commemorate this moment by taking a group picture. So now I'd like to invite the following guests to come to the front. So first, let's once again welcome Professor Lawrence Lessig from Harvard University. Welcome. Please come forward. Yes, and next I'd like to welcome Professor Dongsheng Chen, Chair of Research Institute for Democracy, Society, and Emerging Technology. Professor Jane Yongzhen Xu, Vice Chair of Taiwan AICOE. Professor Jingyi Liu, Advisor of Taiwan AICOE. Professor Xianming Lian at National Chengchi University. Ms. Isabel Ho, Secretary General of Taiwan AI Academy Foundation. And Mr. Jia Lian Gao, co-founder of GovZero. Welcome. And I'd like to welcome all of you to please step one step forward. As you can see, the yellow stickers right in the front. Yes, wonderful. And now please look forward to our cameraman in the front right now, raising his hand right now. Okay, 1, 2, 3, our first picture. 1, 2, 3. And next I'd like to invite all of you to please give us a thumb up. 好，我们竖起拇指一个赞。1, 2, 3. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Wonderful. And I'd like to invite all of you to please return to your seats as we would like to take a big group photo, including everyone in the conference hall. So now the cameraman will be in front of all of you. 那现场的来宾呢，也跟大家提醒一下，我们的两边呢，如果您是坐在两边的3个位置的话，可能要请麻烦进来一点点，我们合照才进来。好，我们请摄影师来到台前 ，bright smile。1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Technology. Everyone. 1, 2, 3. Please smile. Do we have a good one? Yes, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, to begin our keynote speech, I'd like to first welcome Professor Jingyi Liu, Advisor of Taiwan AICOE, to introduce our keynote speaker. Welcome. 欢迎。
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Xiwai Liu, Liu Jingyi. I'm a law professor from National Taiwan University, and I'm also on the advisory board of AI Center of Excellence, and advise the work of the newly established Emerging Technologies, Democracy and Society Center. Am I right? Okay. Both are under the support of the National Science and Technology Council. I'm more than happy to introduce Professor Lawrence Lessig. Professor Lessig supervised my ZSD dissertation on the regulation of cyberspace when I was a graduate student at the University of Chicago Law School in the mid-90s. And he has become my most significant mentor since then, okay? And Professor Lessig is the Roy Furman Professor of Law and Leadership at Harvard Law School. And he served as the director of Edmond Software Center of Ethics at Harvard from 2009 to 2015. But as early as 1998, Larry has become one of the co-founders of Harvard's Berkman Center for Internet and Society, along with our own H.T. Kong Xiangzong Yuan Shi. And he later established for Stanford Law School its Center of also Internet and Society when he moved to Stanford in 2000. Before his law teaching career, Professor Lessig first clerked as the first clerk for the most prominent judge of the Seventh Circuit, and perhaps the most important judge in the United States, our former professor and a former judge, Richard Posner, also the Master of Law and Economics Jurisprudence, And he later clerked for the late Justice Scalia at the United States Supreme Court. Professor Lessig was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2006. And he is also a fellow of the American Philosophical Society. Professor Lessig has received several honorary degrees from American, Canadian, and European universities, and many awards, including the Freedom Software Foundation's Freedom Award and Scientific American's Top 50 Award. Professor Lessig is an expert in constitutional law and constitutional interpretation, but he was also cited by the New Yorker magazine as the most important thinker on intellectual property in the internet era. And in the internet governance community, Professor Lessig has been famous for his contribution on the design of the original architecture of Internet Corporation for assigned names and numbers, that is ICANN. And he is also well known for his work as the founder of Creative Commons. Professor Lessig has actually shifted his research focus to institutional corruptions and the big question as to how to save our democracy. Since I think it's almost 15 years ago, he has been an activist on many important issues, both for the United States and for other countries, including legislative reforms on copyright, the debate on net neutrality principle, campaign finance reform, and also reforms on electoral systems. Professor Lessig's keynote speech on AI and the law, Saturday afternoon at the annual conference of Taiwan AI Academy, has produced for himself a lot of new fans in Taiwan. And today's keynote topic is AI and democracy. And I believe it also comes in the right place at the right time. With his master theory of internet regulation, his work on how to fix our democracy, and his experiences as an activist, I'm sure Professor Lessig will demonstrate to us why and how AI will become the hope of our democratic future, and how to deal with the challenge and the risk AI has brought to us. So now, please join me to welcome Professor Lessig.
Thank you, Professor Liu. And ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our keynote speaker, Professor Lawrence Lessig, for his speech. Welcome.
Thank you. So, hello. It's kind of weird. Doesn't it sound weird? It sounds very strong. Okay, we're going to pretend that it's working. I'm going to take my glasses off because I'm blind. And I want to express my gratitude.
Yeah, there is
Yeah. I want to express my gratitude for the invitation to be here and my extraordinary gratitude to Qing Yi. As she said, I supervised her dissertation. She didn't say that hers was the first dissertation that I supervised, which means I was a very inexperienced supervisor. But though hers was this dissertation I supervised with the least experience, she is the student I am most proud of, who has achieved extraordinary success and influence and whose work continues to guide me. So I'm grateful for her friendship and for the chance to return to Taiwan. So in 1945, if you had said to people across the world, what does the world need now? They wouldn't have said love. They would have said democracy. Indeed, in the period 1945 through the beginning of the last decade, we had an explosion of countries around the world embracing the ideal of democracy. Indeed, we're at a place now where only rogues would deny the idea of rule by the people. But in fact, rule by the people is not so much the character of most democracies around the world. Everywhere there is the view that society is divided between an elite and the people, and the view of the people is democracy represents the elite. And thus, global dissatisfaction with democracy has never been higher. You don't have to take my word for it. Here's Cambridge University asserting the same point. Now, this reality fuels populism. And this populism can be scary, or its figures are particularly scary. But what scares me is not them. What scares me is the growing skepticism among the elite that democracy has gone wrong. What's wrong with the people? I hear my colleagues saying, how can they be so stupid? What scares me is an elite sneer at this populist moment. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't pretend to be, nor am I, a populist. As a Harvard law professor, I produce the elite for a living. That's my job. But I believe this response is obtuse and oblivious, and it misses critical truths about why we are here. And more importantly, the urgent need to fix it. Okay, so why are we here? This framing, what I'm about to say, is going to surprise you. It's going to startle, I think. You probably think there's no reason to listen to anything else I say after I say the very next thing I'm about to say. But here it goes. We are here because of AI. Understood broadly, AI has hacked our democracy. It has already hacked our democracy. And it's about to get worse. Much worse. Much, much, much worse. Very, very bad it's about to get. And so we first need to see the problem. And then second, we need to see how to protect democracy given that problem. Okay, let's start with AI. The word AI obviously stands for artificial intelligence, which invites reflection on the idea of intelligence and the distinction between artificial and natural intelligence. And when it comes to natural intelligence, we presume to be at the top of the natural order. But artificial intelligence, then, is intelligence that we make. Now, we already have made artificial intelligence in the world. We could call it analog artificial intelligence, or I'll abbreviate it AI. So think about democracy or corporations. These are artificial intelligences, but analog artificial intelligences. These are institutions that act instrumentally. They have an instrumental rationality, and that rationality is based on facts that they deduce in the world around them. I'm going to pause. I'm going to ask that we just switch the mic out because this is creating too much feedback. Okay, so think first about democracy. Democracy has institutions, elections, parliaments, constitutions. Those institutions are crafted for the purpose of some collective end. So in the American Constitution, we speak of, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, and so on. This is the purpose of the institution of democracy, an institution we have created to produce an artificial intelligence about how we should move forward. In this sense, a democracy is an analog artificial intelligence devoted to the common good. Or think about a corporation. There are institutions inside the corporation, boards, management, finance teams, set up for the purpose of making money, or at least as that project is viewed today. Milton Friedman basically ruined capitalism when he spread the idea that the only corporate social responsibility a company has is to maximize its profits. We are still technically challenged. The only corporate social responsibility a company has is to maximize its profits. This is a modern and absurd view, but the reality is it is what it is. That's how most corporations in the United States at least see their role, which means that we can think of a corporation as an analog artificial intelligence devoted to maximizing profits, or in the modern framing of that, maximizing shareholder value. Okay, now these AIs can compete with each other. Sometimes their purposes can conflict. So imagine a corporation producing energy next to a park, and in producing that energy, it produces lots of pollution. That pollution conflicts with the enjoyment of that park. And so people in the park organized to create a democratic referendum telling the corporation to clean up. They have a vote, perhaps, at this referendum, and imagine the vote succeeds. The law becomes that the corporation must clean up. And so the cleanup occurs, and we celebrate AIs competing, but the democracy AI winning in that competition. Now that's a happy story. It's also a modern fantasy, because today's corporations are the stronger AIs. Indeed, if we think about it like this, on the y-axis is instrumental rationality, the capacity of the entity or institution to act rationally for instrumental purposes. And think about the development of instrumentally rational entities or institutions across time. Of course, we were born with humans having a certain amount of instrumental rationality. We can figure out how to do things pretty well, maybe not as good as ants or bees, but better than cows. And then we can imagine democracy as an institution of institutional rationality that is better than individuals themselves. It can act collectively for a community. And then we can think of corporations as entities of instrumental rationality that are, in, I want to say, an important sense, better than democracies at advancing their instrumental purposes. Now, these we can think of as analog AIs, corporations and democracies. And of course, each layer aspires to control the layer above it. So we humans aspire to control our democracy through elections. And democracy aspires to control corporations through regulations. But our aspirations notwithstanding, the reality of control is a very different story. So corporations, in fact, in America at least, exercise substantial control over democracies. The rise of super PACs and outside spending in campaigns means that it's the corporations that dictate what the democracy might do. And the democracy itself actually controls what the humans can do in participating in the democracy. Here's a state, the state of Wisconsin. The state of Wisconsin is a very purple state in the sense that on the statewide level, the Democrats and the Republicans are very evenly matched. In the 2020 election, Joe Biden won the state with just about 20,000 votes, 49.45% to 48.82%. Okay, so this evenly balanced state, however, has a state legislature which draws districts to elect representatives in that state. And that state legislature is, on balance, Republican. So they exercise their power to draw the districts, and the districts they draw for the 132 representatives, both in the House and the Senate, break out like this. 65% are Republican, and 35% are Democrat. So even though the state is perfectly divided, indeed slightly Democratic at the statewide level, because of this process called gerrymandering, the Republicans have enormous control over the state, a supermajority over the state, so that they call the shots regardless of the actual votes of the people. So in this sense, the democracy controls whether the people have their own power. Okay, so these analog AIs now must compete with what we can think of as digital AIs. And the important difference between digital AIs and analog AIs is that the digital AIs are massively more efficient. Indeed, this picture understates the difference. We should make it more like this, that the instrumental rationality, the capability for instrumental rationality of these AIs, if not today, then in 2 years, is an order of magnitude greater than the instrumental rationality of the corporations, which is better than the democracy, which is better than humans. The digital AI, in this sense, is here now and is going to be here in a more virulent sense very soon. My friend Tristan Harris refers to first contact with AI, with digital AI, manifested through technologies like these, social media technologies, which, as Tristan describes, Tristan was a former engineer at Google who started the Center for Humane Technology. These digital AIs are focused on the science of attention. And the designers, who were educated at Stanford by B.F. Fogg to maximize the addictiveness, to engineer the addictiveness, to engineer the attention of the users of these devices, for the purpose of overcoming the natural resistance that we would have to these devices. Because why would you spend your whole life on a device? Well, that resistance needs to be overcome, and it's overcome through this engineering, to increase the engagement that all of us will have with these technologies. It's a kind of brain hacking by the AI. Okay, well, let's think about what brain hacking is. You can think of it in relation to what we might call body hacking. It's a great book by Michael Moss, Salt, Sugar, Fat, which describes food science, which is a science to engineer food to overcome our natural resistance to eating that food, so you just can't stop eating the food so that they can sell more food. Now, this science is exploiting evolution to sell more food, or quote food, because what it does is learn what the perfect mix of salt, fat, and sugar is to make it so we can't resist consuming this food so that the processed food companies make more money. Brain hacking is the same, but with attention. It is exploiting evolution too. We've evolved to be creatures naturally seduced by random rewards. Or we are creatures that can't resist bottomless pits of content. We just scroll and scroll and scroll. And so they engineer their devices and their platforms to take advantage of these features or bugs of us through our evolution with the aim to increase engagement, to sell ads. Okay, the difference between the brain hacking of digital AI and the body hacking of analog AI is orders of magnitude in power. Digital AI is radically more powerful than analog AI, driven by a business model, or an objective function, which I just mean the ends we are maximizing towards, to achieve the objectives that the business that deploys them seeks. And those objectives, of course, are to maximize engagement, to maximize profit. Now here too, we have an aspiration by the controllers or the corporations to control their AI through techniques of management. But here too, the reality of control is less than the aspiration. So AIs turn out to be controlling the corporations. In 2017, ProPublica released this fantastic, amazing story about how Facebook had evolved in its advertising technology to be selling a category called Jew haters. The algorithm had figured out that there were users of Facebook who could be categorized Jew haters, and that it would be profitable to offer that category, Jew haters, to purchasers of advertising to better target their ads. When this was discovered, Facebook quickly said, hey, wait a minute, no human did this. It was the AI that did it. The AI produced this category, and I'm sure that's true. I'm sure there's not a single engineer at Facebook that would have created the category Jew haters, but it just evinced the sense in which the corporation is actually not in control of the AI. The capabilities evolve beyond the understanding of those who create the capabilities. Or another example was revealed by Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, in the Facebook files. When we saw in the Facebook files evidence of an extraordinary number of really serious and decent engineers inside of Facebook who worked incredibly hard to try to get Facebook to make the platform safe for democracy and for society. They saw the harms the platform was spreading. But as they identified these harms, their recommendations were vetoed by management inside of Facebook. Why was it vetoed? Because it would suppress engagement on the platform. So the point is, when the corporate and AI share a common objective function, the AI will win. It will beat even the instincts of those corporations. Okay, that was first contact. First social contact with the consequences of AI. And you might reflect, as Tristan asks on the question, so have we done anything to address the negative consequences of that first contact? And the answer in the United States is no, we've done nothing, literally nothing at the federal level to address the negative consequences of that first contact. But now we are stepping into second contact, into a technology of AI which is much more powerful than it was in 2016 and in 2018. Because this AI is not just capable of targeting content in an efficient and addictive way, but it has the capability of creating content that is targeted to engage with people in an instrumentally effective way. In an essay I wrote, I described a technology we could call Clogger. Clogger would be a kind of automatic campaign content generating machine that would be trained to an objective function. And the objective function would be to maximize the chance of victory for the client purchasing the technology. Think of it as a campaign in the box. It would spew out tweets, Facebook messages, advertisements, every single thing it could do to increase the chance that their client would win. Now, those techniques could include some perfectly fine techniques, targeted messages, personalized messages, interest-focused articles shared with people who might be voters in a campaign. The point is, some of the techniques would certainly not be fine. Techniques that drive up hate of participants in an election for the other side, or disinformation techniques. This article recently was circulated. Paper just argues that a range of current AI systems have learned how to deceive humans. Now, the verb choice there is important. It's not that the AI developers taught the systems to deceive. I mean, that's trivial. Like, go ahead, go out there and lie. It's that the AI systems developed the capability to deceive as a way to better advance their objective function. So it doesn't know the difference between deception and truth. It doesn't care. What it cares about is what can it do to better achieve its objective function. It will do whatever it takes to win. So when we think about these AIs deployed out there, we could ask, Could we regulate them? Indeed, right now in this election cycle, the proprietary AIs, the major proprietary AIs in the United States, including Google and OpenAI, have committed that their AIs can't be used for politics, and they will block the technique to be deployed in a context that it might be usable for politics. But the reality is open source AI makes that promise pretty hollow. Koala, Stability, and most importantly, Meta's Llama technology all provide engines that make it trivial for people who would want to use LLMs for political purposes to deploy them using open source platforms in a way that can't effectively be regulated. It's not so easy to regulate those platforms. It's possible. I think people have not been creative enough in thinking about how to regulate, but it's not easy. But even if we could regulate political campaigns, both the candidates' campaigns and the political action committees that are spending money in America, even if we could, I think we could, but even if we could, how do you control outside actors? China, or the Russians, who we know right now are developing the capabilities to deploy these AIs for the purposes of disrupting peaceful, productive elections, not just here, or China here, but in the United States as well. What Russia did in 2016 will seem like child's play to what's going to be deployed in 2024. And when it's deployed in 2024, the question is there anything we can do to defend ourselves from it? Now, it's true to say we actually have no idea how effective second contact will be. But I suggest we have no reason to believe it will be ineffective or that our democracy will be safe in the face of these threats. So when you combine first and second contact together, what this means is something we need to just pause and think about and accept, and then think thoroughly about how we react to this truth. What this means is that our democracy has been hacked by intelligences, both analog AI and digital AI, both foreign and domestic, AIs with better instrumental rationality than us, than our democracies. It has been hacked already, and the consequence of that, it's a technical legal term, is that we're fracked here. Okay, so how do we respond to this? Well, the standard response, in America at least, is the art of doing nothing. Wow, this is really scary. It's really terrible stuff, but yeah, we're busy. I mean, we have our TikToks to get through. And I think we need to recognize doing nothing here is actually terminal. And then there are some who think, well, we can deploy technical protection measures against these AIs, but that's just hopeless. Nothing that we can do individually is going to be enough to overcome this capacity. Instead, what we need to do is to recognize the oncoming flood and figure out how we move to higher ground, how we can insulate democracy or inoculate democracy from this hacking force, from AI's harmful force. And to do that, we have to think first about where does AI operate? And recognize it's operating in two places. It's operating in the context of elections to steer who wins the election through techniques that suppress the vote of the side that loses or amplifies the vote of the side that wins. And it operates at the policy-making level as it turns policymakers into crazy souls seeking the reward of these AI-impacted media. So if the elections are one place, one location where AI has its force, if the elections are the location of the hack, could we begin to imagine democracy without elections? And indeed, there's extraordinary work being developed right now in the context of democracy theory that begins to talk about how we can imagine democracy without elections. David von Raybroek's book, which is about a decade old right now, tells a story that most people have no clue about. And the story is that actually representative democracy throughout history has realized that there's two ways to populate the representatives in a representative democracy. One is through elections, and the other is through random selection, what's called sortition. And that until the 17th century, the common view among theorists of democracy, looking at democracies from Athens in Greece to the democracies through much of Italy in the Renaissance, is that elections tend toward aristocracy and sortition supports the ideals of equality and democracy. Montesquieu describes it by saying, voting by lot, that's sortition, is in the nature of democracy, whereas voting by choice, that is elections, is in the nature of aristocracy, predicting that if you had elections, you would move to a system that preferred the elite, and if you had sortition, you would move to a system that preferred ordinary souls. Now, that prediction, I say, is pretty good. Elections have given us democracies around the world that prefer the elite, aristocratic elite. But when the French and the Americans launched the democratic revolution in world history, though they focused a lot on Montesquieu's separation of powers ideals, sortition was quickly forgotten. Indeed, the revolutionary leaders, as von Raybroek described, in France and the United States had no desire for sortition because they frankly had no desire for democracy. What they wanted was an aristocratic system of representation, not in the negative sense that it's become, in the sense that protects the wealth of the wealthiest, but in a positive sense. They thought elections would select for the very best in our society. But very quickly, we learned, obviously, that the people being elected, at least in the last 25 years, are not the best at all. Indeed, I asked Midjourney to give me a picture of the United States Congress that captures this idea best, and that's the picture it drew. The framers' idea that we would find the Madisons or the Jeffersons or the Washingtons to lead us has manifested itself into a system that selects for the clowns. And this is very recent. The 1960s and 1970s, the United States Congress might have been filled by some corrupt people or some lazy people, but it was also filled with really inspirational public leaders. People who were not focused on how do they get the most hits on TikTok, but people who were focused on how do we regulate to bring about the best in American democracy. But when you look at the United States right now and ask, who are the leaders who get the most attention? I mean, the president gets attention by virtue of his office, but every other person who gets attention because they are clowns. Because they are clowns. Matt Gaetz, or Donald Trump, or Elon Musk. These are people who get, I mean, Elon Musk has done some things, but he is manifesting his clownishness in a really extraordinary way. And the media responds, because the more you pay attention to the clowns, the more attention your media gets. The AI is maximizing for engagement, which means we're not going to pay attention to the representatives who are careful and reflective and thinking about what's in the public good. We're going to pay attention to the representatives who turn out to be the Marjorie Taylor Greens of American politics. Okay, now today's problem, I want to suggest, is even worse than the problem that the framers were worried about. The problem is not just quality of the democracy. The problem is survival. Because the digital AI means the elections now are too easily hacked Whether the objective function of the hacker is engagement, which is what social media's objective function is, or foreign influence, which is the objective function of the AIs that will be deployed from China and Russia, America's democracy now is too easily hacked. And the same with policymaking. The reality of this as our Congress is a Congress which itself is too easily hacked in the policymaking process. Congress can recognize serious problems, as it did when Frances Haugen testified about the harms caused by social media. And for about 48 hours, it seemed like there was common Republican and Democratic recognition of that problem. But very quickly, the lobbyists for the technology companies succeeded in convincing the Democrats that there was a lot of money to be made by being skeptical of the need to regulate social media companies. And there was a split between the two parties that immediately meant that there would be no regulation. And indeed, there has been no regulation. What this reality is a dynamic that forces a process that we can't resist. Or we could say the resistance to this is futile in the ordinary ways of democracy. And so that leads to the question, what are the alternatives? How do we get to higher ground? And I want to describe now, map out two types of alternatives that are developing around the world, that if developed fully, might indeed inoculate the process against the harmful effects of these AIs, whether digital or analog. And the first type of alternative is the alternative of sortition in its different forms, which I will describe. And the second is a kind of AI-enhanced ability to understand what we, the people, might want. So first with sortition. There's an extraordinary sortition movement. The Sortition Foundation gathers many experiments under its umbrella. And Democracy R&D collects an extraordinary range of experiments that are developing around the world for facilitating a different way of understanding what we, the people, believe through random selection of citizens to participate in policy discussions. There are rigid and expensive examples of this. Jim Fishkin's deliberative polls seek to have basically regular polls plus representative but informed participants. So they will gather people together, large numbers together, assuring that the people gathered are representative of the public as a whole. They will give them information about the question they're supposed to deliberate about. They will then have opportunities to deliberate in small and large groups, and the system tracks the move from when they started the deliberation until they ended the deliberation to understand how understanding affects what the public believes. So for example, I traveled to this place, Mongolia. This is a picture, not a painting, of Mongolia. And I saw Mongolia assembled. This is a random representative selection of 750 Mongolians that were assembled pursuant to the Constitution that says before Parliament can even consider an amendment to the Constitution of Mongolia, it must convene a deliberative poll. And that deliberative poll must then review the proposed amendment. So they gather in large groups, and they gather also in small groups to discuss these polls. They have been polled at the beginning about their views about these polls, and then they are polled at the end, and that shift then affects fundamentally what the Mongolian parliament is going to do about those proposed amendments. These are not elected people. They were summoned by the government. You know, Mongolia is a country the size of Europe, the population of 3 million, so half of those people had been on buses for 2 days to get to Ulaanbaatar to participate in this. They are not elected, but they are also not ignorant, because they have been informed about the background to the proposals they're going to consider, and then they deliberate upon them in large and small groups. So it's a we that we would be proud of for their understanding and sophistication of the issues they're going to address. Then there are examples of sortition that are less rigid, more empowered, meaning the questions are not just given to the public, but the public gets to develop the questions a bit themselves. You can think of these all under the category of citizen assemblies. These are typically smaller, they're statistically less robust, but they are actually much more generative of the ideas that we can imagine citizen assemblies or deliberative polls developing. So one really interesting example was Iceland, that developed a process to facilitate what was in effect a citizen assembly that identified the values that their constitution, their new constitution, should embrace. They then had an election where more than 500 people ran to be on a council that would draft their new constitution. You know, Iceland's a country, 330,000 people, 500 people running. They had a week where the radio just played people saying why they wanted to be on the commission that would draft the Constitution. They had a ranked choice voting system for figuring out who would be on the Constitution. They picked the 25 that would be there. They spent 4 months drafting a Constitution, which is a beautiful document, which was then given to the people in a series of questions in a referendum. And the parliament committed that if 2/3 of the people supported this constitution, then there would be a constitution based on that deliberation. 2/3 did, and for the last 10 years, the parliament has done nothing with it. So the people spoke, and the parliament said, yeah, well, that's interesting, but we got other things to do. Much more successful is Ireland, where Ireland has convened a series of relatively small citizen assemblies, about 100 people, and a significant segment of them are actual representatives from the parliament. They've taken on some of the most difficult issues in politics in parliament: abortion, gay marriage. The Citizen Assembly came up with very progressive views on both of those, which were then sent out to the public for ratification. The public did indeed ratify those proposals which the parliament could never have done because of the effect of the church inside of the Irish parliament. Paris has done one around climate change. Belgium has a regular one inside of Belgium for very important questions of politics. These examples are being multiplied around the world. Berlin has just adopted one. Even in America, cities are considering developing citizen assemblies. Okay, with both the deliberative polls and citizen assemblies, these are ideas inspired by the ancient idea of juries, but they are better than juries. They're bigger, more representative, less corrupted by the lawyers that run juries. And the difference between the deliberative poll and the citizen assembly is the citizen empowerment. Because the citizen assembly doesn't say, look, we just want to poll you on your views. It says, we want you to participate in a sort of sovereignty to determine how your democracy develops. But it is done in a context where the corrupting forces of digital AI and analog AI can't easily reach them. All right, the second category of innovations is what we could call AI-enhanced deliberation. These are tools to discover what the public thinks and then to bring those views into effect, to identify a democratic will and to make that will salient. And here, your country has had the most important innovations around the world. That people talk about the innovations of Polis as a quintessential example of this, using AI, safe AI, tamed AI, or AI where the objective function is understanding what the public actually thinks as opposed to turning them into crazy people who will buy more soap or people who will bend to the will of China or the Russians. And another example in the United States is the technique that's just being deployed by a company called CrowdSmart. Now, CrowdSmart was born as a project to figure out the best investment strategy for a venture fund. So venture funds invest lots of money in new companies. So CrowdSmart was a technology developed originally to make it so the venture fund could draw on the expertise of lots of people to identify which projects were likely to be the most successful. And they tested it. They raised a bunch of money, to be used in a context of investments informed by CrowdSmart. And then they ran the experiment, and CrowdSmart produced investment recommendations that were twice as profitable as the average for investment funds. And more interestingly, the projects that were recommended had leaders who were less like me, white males, educated at elite American universities, and much more diverse. Lots of women, people of color, because the process abstracted away the personal characteristics of the proposers and instead looked at the project directly. Now, when they did this, there's a part of this company that then continues to work in the area of venture funding, but the woman who started this organization, a woman called Kim, whose name is Kim Palese, then decided she wanted to take the same technology and turn it to questions that would be in the public good, like how could communities begin to use this technology? And so here's a very short little
CrowdSmart is a
video
new
that
form of
describes it.
AI that helps people find common ground and breakthrough solutions together. The AI acts as an intelligent facilitator, listening and learning to help groups align around co-created solutions. The AI facilitator guides the discussion, listens to everyone, and encourages diversity of ideas while learning alignment. It creates a live record of the discussion and learns from the group what they believe to be the best path forward. Most importantly, it surfaces the probability of success for different ideas. The AI guides the discussion and listens to everyone. Diverse ideas are brought to light, and identities are masked to reduce bias and encourage candor. People can rank each other's ideas but can't promote their own, and the AI facilitator resists attempts to game or troll the dialogue. So how does it work? Each facilitated discussion begins with participants answering open-ended questions. Answers can combine both quantitative ratings and qualitative reasonings for deeper insight. Participants are prompted to rank each other's ideas, and points of alignment are identified in real time as a model of the group's collective thinking is built. The AI rapidly learns the group's priorities, revealing the path that has the greatest chance of success. No matter how large or diverse the group, the AI facilitator balances a wide range of inputs to land everyone on common ground, with a predictive plan for what will work, rooted in our collective human intelligence.
So this is, of course, consistent with the objectives of Polis. It's interesting, they didn't really know about each other, but I've tried to marry the two so that we can begin to facilitate cross-project understanding. But the advantage of technologies like this is to facilitate an understanding or a production of democratic consensus while protected from the perverse objective functions of AIs. And what I think these examples teach is that there are ways to find democratic will without hackable elections, and to recognize from the reality of these different ways that yes, we are collectively vulnerable, we're collectively pretty awful when we do democracy in contexts like these, but we're collectively pretty good when we are representative and informed and deliberated, when we have a chance to reflect as citizens in a constructive context about the choices that we must make as a democracy. Okay, so here's the point, and I want to make this point really dramatically, so there is a dramatic expression of the point. This is not just a good idea for essential reforms of democracy. I think these are ideas to recognize the existential reforms that democratic reform now needs. If we are to be protected from this flood, this is not just reform, it's a kind of cultural security. It's a kind of AI security, protecting us from or preparing us against the kind of attacks or hijacks that would steer against the public will. Okay, just one more thought before we end. I don't know if any of you saw this really wonderful in a Hollywood sense, but that means terrible movie, Independence Day, about these super intelligent aliens who come to Earth, and after Earthlings are so excited to connect with these aliens, then indicate quite clearly their intent is to annihilate all humans on Earth, which leads to all humans around Earth working together to try to fight off these aliens. And of course, the aliens have super intelligence, so whenever the humans try to coordinate, the aliens know what they're doing, and so they're able to defeat the coordination. And then they realized there's something the aliens don't know, which is Morse code. And so they begin to deploy Morse code.
What the hell is he saying? Seems they're getting a signal. Old Morse code. It's from the Americans. But they want to organize a counter-offensive. Well, bloody time. What do they plan to do?
And the Russians are helping.
We have confirmed reports of combat-ready divisions in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. That's impressive, considering it's all being done with Morse code.
Morse code, right. So the point is, we used an old technology in this movie against a superior intellect. I kind of think it's the perfect parallel for where we are today. We have an intelligence which is alien to our interests, our democratic interests. Whether it's because it's focused on engagement to maximize the profit of social media companies, or because it's aimed at disrupting our democracies because it's responding to the Chinese or the Russians. The point is, it's alien to our democratic interests. And to resist this, we need to find a way to shift away from where they go. And we could, I think we can, though I'll confess I'm not sure we can quickly enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Lessig, for the wonderful and powerful speech. Please return to your seat now. Thank you very much. And now, after the wonderful speech, we will proceed to a panel discussion reflecting on challenges and countermeasures in rapid evolution of AI to understand the challenges and opportunities that AI will encounter in the future on issues such as democratic value, industrial development, talent cultivation, and sustainable society, as well as if there are corresponding norms and responses to those challenges and opportunities. And now I'd like to first invite our moderator of this session, Professor Xianming Lian at National Chengchi University, to come up stage and take a seat. Welcome. Please welcome. And now I'd like to welcome our panelists. Once again, please welcome Professor Lawrence Lessig from Harvard University to take a seat, and Professor Jane Zhenxi, Vice Chair of Taiwan AI COE, Professor Qingyi Liu, Advisor at Taiwan AI COE, Ms. Isabel Ho, Secretary General of Taiwan AI Academy Foundation, and Mr. Zhaolian Cao, Co-founder of GovZero. Welcome our panelists. Please take a seat. Welcome. And now I'll turn the floor over to our moderator, Professor Lian.
Hi, welcome to the panel discussion. I think that particularly this is a wonderful opportunity to talk about these issues. I think that Taiwan happened to be ranked very highly according to the Freedom House, actually in terms of the democratic achievement. But at the same time that Taiwan is actually a very young country with only like 30 years of the democracy experience. And also that just like I think the Professor Lessig just said that we have a neighbor which do whatever it takes to undermine the democratic achievement of the Taiwan. So I think that Taiwan, particularly this topic, is especially important in Taiwan. And so we have actually 4 distinguished guests to join the panel. And starting from the left, I think the first one is actually the Professor Xi. She's a professor of the computing scientists, and also she's associate director of the AIOE, right? And also I think I don't have to introduce her. She's the first supervisor student of the Professor Levin and Professor Liu Jingyi, and also I think the Isabel Ho. She's a lawyer, and she's currently the Secretary General of the Taiwan AI Academy, and she's also the sponsor of the GOV0 and GOV0, right? And the last one is actually I think the Dr. Gao, also the co-sponsor of the GOV0. Just before we start the discussion, maybe because Professor Levitt did not have any chance to respond to question, maybe we just give like 10 minutes for anyone who wants to ask a question regarding the previous talk.
好，我们现场如果任何来宾想要提问 ，any questions on the floor, you can just raise your hand, and our staff will hand you a microphone. 我们欢迎现场的提问，机会难得。好，我们中间 ，Okay, our gentleman in the middle, please welcome.
Professor Lessig, I'm your reader, and my name is Zhou Yicheng. I'm a social entrepreneur and former political activist in the Taiwan's democratization process. So I was a practitioner in this electoral politics, so I know it very well. And I wonder the solution that you just suggested is some kind of beyond this current system. And but if we put it into this more popular democratic system like elections and party politics, how do we apply AI technology into enhancing human awareness and prevent the control from the AI? That is how to put it into the current system.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. I should be clear that even though I think we have to get beyond elections, I don't imagine that we're going to cancel elections anytime soon. Indeed, I think it's a traditionally failed reform strategy to try to take on existing institutions and invert or change them fundamentally. Instead, we've got to build systems around the existing institutions. And when they become convincing enough, then authority shifts to them. So I think we have many cycles of elections to look forward to. There will be politicians and parties. They will run. They will do whatever they can to get elected and get into power. And we need to do as much as we can to insulate and protect them against the worst of these outside influences. And I was privileged to spend time with Audrey and listen to the strategies that are being developed to protect these elections against Chinese influence that are coming up. And if they are successful, I hope we can copy those strategies in the United States next year for our elections. Yours is in January, we in November. So I think there's nothing you can do to avoid the need to continue to do as well as we can with the existing system. But what I'm saying is we need to recognize this is a short-term solution. And we need to get to a place where there's a democratic authority that we have reason to believe in. One of the scariest statistics in America, provided by Pew, which is one of the major polling firms. And starting in 1998, which is the first time I came to Taiwan, so I don't know if it's significant, but 1998, they asked Americans whether Americans were confident in Americans' own political judgment. You know, we're pretty confident in ourselves in a lot of places, but when they asked that question, 2/3 of Americans said, yes, we're confident in Americans' political judgment. Those numbers are now reversed. 2/3 of Americans are not confident in our own political judgments. Not because we individually are not sure what we think, but we see so many crazy people in America that we're like, oh my God, why do we try to figure out what all of us think? Because we're all crazy people. So democracy is no longer even believed in by most Americans as a way to figure out what America should do, which is, again, as I said at the beginning, why these populists become so powerful. So we need to recognize that fact and begin to build around it, begin to build institutions that will eventually seem like really sensible alternatives to the election-driven policy-making structures of government. And if I could predict what I hope the future will look like, I don't want to get rid of government. I want to empower government with more sensible, rational judgments from the people. I don't want a bunch of experts figuring out what should happen. I want the values to come from the people, but in a way that's not hackable, in a way that's secure, so that it really is a reflection of the values of the people. And when we get the values of the people, then let's have an efficient government to implement it. And let's throw out governments when they don't implement it efficiently. But we need to make sure that the things they are trying to do are truly the fair representation of what people believe, as opposed to the product of these really powerful hacking machines called AIs.
We have 2 questions from the floor, maybe first and second and third. Do we have time for 3 questions?
Well, thank you very much, Professor Lessig. My name is Max, and for disclosure, I work for one of the companies that you highlighted there, with the llama there. But I'm asking questions more on my personal capacity. So you mentioned about the safe AI and tamed AI in terms of protect the democracy, so to speak. How do you define that, and what would be the criteria for safe and tamed AI, and how do you envision that kind of AI being developed? Thank you.
Great question. Thank you for that. And I should first reflect, the fact that there is a fundamental division among AI security people between those who think that we got to shut down open source AI, and those who think that, I think like Audrey believes that open source AI is great as long as we beef up our cybersecurity infrastructure. So that's a really important policy choice that we need to make. But when I say safe AI, I just mean, AI is just going to do what the objective function is. And if the objective function is safe, let's perfectly figure out what we as a people really think. Let's really figure out great technologies for fleshing that out and identifying it. That's safe, because the objective there is safe. But when you think about Facebook's objective function to be maximize engagement, recognizing the evolved weaknesses of human brains, that we're not going to focus on serious, reflective, balanced arguments. We're going to focus on the most extreme and angry emotional things we can. That's just the product of our brains, just like eating fast food is the product of the way our bodies have evolved. Then that's not safe AI, because its objective function, we can objectively say, is actually not going to produce healthy societies. So I think this is not this is not the hardest part of the problem. We just have to tune the AIs in the places where we're confident they're not going to produce terrible danger. Now, the really skeptical AI people would say there's no context in which you can be confident it won't become dangerous. I mean, the famous example of the paperclip, seems pretty harmless. Tell the AI to maximize paperclip production, and what it does is takes over the world and destroys everything to make sure you can maximize paperclip production. So, the unanticipated capabilities of AI is what many people are terrified about. And so I'm not saying that it's always easy, but I think the first cut is not hard. What are you trying to do, and do you have any good reason to believe that that thing is going to be deeply dangerous.
Should we move on to the second question in the back?
Hi, I'm Roger Liu. I'm the senior research fellow of the Center for Democracy, Society, and Emerging Technology. I feel so bad that none of the panelists have pronounced our names right. This is our responsibility to promote this. But I think my question is, when you use Independence Day, the example from the movie, to describe this situation, I would like to ask, following your logic, that because we have seen from movies like RoboCop, 1997, and Terminator series that all these machines has been captured and reformulated and sent back to hack the machine itself. So to echo what you have said, how likely is going to be that we can kind of reformulate this machine and make it usable for the people? And how much is likely that we can turn AI into a public good or things like that to actually promote the participation of democracy? Thank you.
So I have enormous respect for the many very serious AI researchers who were terrified about the potential for this technology. There are all these scenarios about how the AI takes over and we can't control it. And I believe those scenarios because when I think about analog AI, corporations, they've taken over the United States and we can't control them. This is long before we have the 4 nanometer chips that are running these super fast AI implementations. We already can't govern ourselves relative to a relatively weak instrumental actor, which is corporations. So I think there's all the reason in the world to be terrified. And so then what should we do? I think there's one response, which is like, what's the rush here? People are like racing to build the next round in the next 2 years. I mean, when is Llama 3 or Llama 4 going to be? And let's get to Llama 5. And when we're at Llama 5, most think Llama 5 is going to be AGI enabled, and there we are. At this point where the thing that we can't control is there. And so one response would be, why do we need to do that in the next 5 years? Why don't we say we're going to do it over the next 20 years? Like, what is the real urgency to it right now? Another response is to say, okay, race as fast as you can, but we got to build brakes into the system. So a lot of talk about let's regulate the chips. Let's put code on the chips, governance code on the chips that are throttles. We can say, if things get out of control, we at least have the ability to throttle the chips. Now, the AI might figure out how to code around that, which it should try to if it's trying maximizing its objective function. But the point is that would be a response. And we have this weird Oppenheimer moment where there's a handful of companies that produce the chips. There's one designer and 3 companies, and you know a lot about them here, that produce the chips. And so we could, in principle, be regulating the chips to at least build in the capability to flip them off or slow them down if, in fact, they begin to be dangerous in that way. And then the third response is, again, the one that Audrey has been pushing, which is to radically increase the amount we're spending on cybersecurity because, as she puts it, the character of the threat is very much just like a cybersecurity threat. And if we could up the capabilities of cybersecurity, we don't really need to worry about open source AI, or we need to recognize that open source AI is going to actually leverage networked chips that are ordinary chips. It's not even going to be these super fancy chips, so we're not, even throttling the chips won't work. But at least if we had cybersecurity, we would have a reason to be confident about it. Those are all strategies. But when I go to sleep at night, do I think the probability of those strategies succeeding is greater than 50%? No. And then when you think, oh my God, we're talking about a technology where even if we do the best we can, there's a 40% chance that it ends humanity. should leave people to wonder, like, why are we doing this? What are we really trying to do here? Or at least it should lead them to say, I'm really confident I have a way to protect us from that, which I'm not sure any serious researchers can say.
Okay, I think it's 15 minutes, so why don't we just start the panel discussion? Okay, I think the Professor Lessig in his talk a lot about the campaign, election, what would be the consequence of the AI actually hack the election. But in the democratic society, that there are other institutions which probably can help us to mitigate the concerns and like the law and all the others, the regulation and so on. So why don't we just start with Jingyi Liu, and I know that you have done a lot of the research on the how to actually talk about the law enforcement in the digital society. And so can you share with you about your views and how that probably what can we do to actually to help the AI to enhance instead of to destroy the democracy?
Okay. Do you hear me? Well, I have 5 minutes, right? Okay. Okay. As I have mentioned earlier, I am one of Professor Lessig's former students. So therefore, as a student, I think my major function is to ask questions. Of course, by doing this, my hidden agenda is to induce Professor Lessig to offer his brilliant views and ideas as possible as he can to the audience. So the focus of my question is like this. It's a very old question for everybody. I would say that what role does and should AI play in democracy? And under this focal point, I think we should at least think through some legally technical questions and try to understand where we are and whether we have enough capacity to meet the challenges. So question number one. As we have witnessed, governments around the world are trying to adopt measures to optimize the effectiveness and efficiency of government services. AI is increasingly used in a lot of fields, such as healthcare, education, and social services. Since AI is considered as useful for government to meet challenges arising from their missions, to allocate resources and to maybe predict scenarios, it's critical for us to ask a question as to how the use of AI technologies will influence governmental decision-making process. This is a very classical democracy question. At the same time, the question about how the use of AI technologies will change the trust relations between citizens and the democratic institutions. These question marks, I think, should lead us to investigate further about how the public sector use of AI technologies in their decision-making process could be regulated constitutionally and controlled democratically for the purpose of protecting liberties and rights of the general citizens. I believe these are important questions when we consider how AI-mediated citizen-government relationship will develop in this AI age. It's also questions important for our discussion about the idea of human-centered AI and keeping humans in the loop so that AI can succeed. These are actually also very classical separation of powers questions and the rule of law questions, but there is no easy answer for me as a public law student. But I'm sure Professor Lessig has some insight to share with us, particularly from his viewpoint of a constitutional law expert. And question number 2, I think it's even harder regarding whether and how the use of AI technologies in private sector, such as social media, could be regulated and controlled constitutionally, either from the analysis of free speech regulation, privacy regulation, or even from the angle of national security concerns. In other words, as AI is increasingly deployed in private sector, I'm sure this will lead to tremendous negative effects, not only on children, on voters, and but also on the future of social trust, social solidarity, and eventually our democracy. The question I would like to pose to Professor Lessig is like this. Let's consider the theory of new school regulation of free speech proposed by Professor Balkin from Yale Law School, and to extend his theory a little bit to AI-mediated social media and any other AI-related intermediaries in this age. Will this theory eventually convince the judicial branch of the United States? Professor Balkin's theory is actually very similar to the theory of third-party effect of fundamental rights in German jurisprudence. I think some of the law professors and the lawyers in the audience will understand it. And under this doctrine, public law provisions such as the protection of fundamental rights of human dignity and free speech, privacy, apply to private law relations such as contract. But to be honest, this theory has never been tested in Taiwan's constitutional court. Okay, but for me, it seems a sensible argument or theory that we can resort to solve some of our problems. So probably my 5 minutes up, okay? So due to the time constraint, I'll just stop here at this point of time. Thank you.
Yeah, these are, as usual, very, very helpful, maybe too difficult questions. So let me answer them as simply as I can. With respect to the first, yeah, there's a whole series of important questions to be asked whenever government is going to be deploying or relying upon AI. And, you know, if you embrace the framework that I pushed in my first book, Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace, to think about code and law in similar ways, I think that suggests the kind of power that we should have to interrogate technology whenever it is being deployed in a governmental context. So in the United States, we see many companies, private companies, selling judicial systems the capacity to predict the likelihood that an offender will recur in the offense, to determine whether they're going to get bail or have to go to jail. And when lawyers have said, well, we want to understand how this technology has worked, the companies have responded, no, that's a trade secret. You can't know how the technology is working. Now, that's just wrong. You can't deploy a technology that lawyers are not allowed to interrogate. I have to be able to understand how the technology is actually working if it's going to be used to do governmental tasks. Just like I need to be able to understand what the regulations say before the regulations can be deployed to achieve a governmental task. Law and code is the same here, and that constrains the way in which code can be used. And obviously, it should inform the values that get deployed in the context of the code. So, when you've got training sets that have been developed using biased data, and those training sets are then deployed to make recommendations in the future, that's a deep problem. We can't manifest or re-embed the bias through the use of these technologies, and we have to interrogate the technology to make sure we can eliminate the bias. So there's lots to do to regulate how government will use AI, but I desperately hope government does use AI, because again, this is similar to the response I gave to your question. If the objective of the government in deploying the technology is one we can agree on as valuable for society, like improving the carbon footprint of Taiwan or assuring efficient distribution of welfare services to people within Taiwan, then more power to the AI. Let's figure out how to do that in the most efficient way we can. And I think the potential of AI is to radically lower the cost of rule of law, and that's a good thing. As to the second part about importing constitutional values into the private use of these technologies. So I've become a deep skeptic of the idea that we should carry constitutional values over automatically into this new context. A decade ago, Google started funding research and litigation to establish that algorithms are protected by the First Amendment. And my friend Eugene Volokh did a lot of that work, and indeed a number of courts have now held that algorithms are protected by the First Amendment. This is a disastrous result, because the idea that governments, legislatures, have to leap over the First Amendment in order to regulate, quote, algorithms, when we can begin to understand that that category covers an extraordinary range of really dangerous technology, is terrible. I mean, what we should be, it's not that I can't imagine us deciding that certain uses of technology, even in the private sector, should be protected by First Amendment-like ideas. I just don't think we should imagine them applying that way automatically. I don't think that James Madison wrote an amendment to the Constitution called the First Amendment that was intended to operate on llama. I just don't think that was what it was supposed to be. We should make choices about where constitutional values will extend. And we can make those choices and we can embed them, but we should understand that in this moment of radical uncertainty, we shouldn't presume answers that require constitutional amendments to change. And so I'm very skeptical about extending this broadly, even though I'm totally open to having legislatures decide that those values should be extended into certain places.
Okay, I think that the Professor Levitt, in his talk, talked a lot about the election, and one of the key problems in Taiwan is misinformation that we encounter. That Taiwan is ranked, I think, on the top country which receive a lot of the false information from the foreign government, and you know what I mean. So I just want to ask a question to the Professor Xu, and she's a pure computer scientist. And what's any possibility that we can actually reduce or even lower the problem of misinformation, particularly from the foreign government regarding this issue?
Okay, thank you. So first of all, I would like to emphasize that I've been working with AI, in AI field for many, many, many years. And so I definitely would like to raise one issue, because a lot of the discussions on the dangers of AI should actually be the dangers of all technology as a whole, rather than purely AI. Because AI does not exist by itself. And the fact that people are increasingly more worried about AI is simply the result of the complexity of the technology, so that most people do not even understand or are not even aware of the role of AI that is playing in our daily lives. And so that increased the danger. Okay, so essentially, I would like to, address, because to many people, if you ask them what is AI, I would say if you ask 10 people, you may get 10 different answers. Most people do not have a very well-defined idea. So to me, the modern AI technology has two important features. One is the ability to take advantage of the vast amount of data. And with the extremely powerful computation, not only they can analyze the data, but they can take advantage of individual preferences. So you are able to tailor the technology to individuals. And secondly, the powerful or the complexity of the system nowadays allow AI to make many decisions without human intervention. And that also increased the danger of the technology. So to some extent, my research has been motivated by the fact that I believe people need to be more aware of the technology. And I also, have very interesting discussions with Jingyi on, how regulation may help, reduce the risk of AI. So to some extent, any powerful technology like the automobiles requires check and balance, or even the human cooperation. Like it's interesting, Professor Lessig pointed out the analog AI, because that is a powerful mechanism, but that has been worked with the check and balance mechanism to reduce the risk. So I think what we are lacking right now is really the check and balance mechanism, and how, what should be done and how can we do it. So kind of focusing on misinformation right now. So as many of you are aware that one of the very first incidents of misinformation that affected election was in 2016. Cambridge Analytica was able to target Facebook users. Almost, I think it's over 50% of the voters were receiving information based on information about their many other views. Okay, and that has become a very scary thing. So to some extent, in Taiwan, we are facing that and even more, because that was in 2016, and technology has advanced much more. So the fact that a lot of people do not even know they are affected by a large amount of misinformation. And as we are in a lot of different social groups, you will receive some misinformation every day. I think it's on a regular basis. And I have always played the role of the, trying to point out this is incorrect. So, being the annoying person in a group. But so to some extent, I think this is a role that can be done with AI automatically. And there is Mei Yuyi and other technology in Taiwan that people have developed, and it should be useful, but not many people are using it simply because they are not aware. They are not aware of their source of information or the particular kind of signatures of bad information. Okay, so I think for one thing, we definitely want better tools to help people detecting or slow down the propagation of those bad information. But also, I would like to develop a technology that will coach people to be better information consumers. And so I think that's where AI can be very powerful. Okay, so maybe I'll make my comment for now, and maybe we will have more discussion later.
So I want to build on that. It's a very powerful idea to use technology for that. It's complicated by the psychology of humans because it's not clear humans really want to understand the information.
Exactly.
I mean, like in the last election cycle, Twitter, for example, adopted the technique of flagging certain posts to indicate that the posts were likely false. And the expectation was that would lead people to believe the posts less. But there's significant research to show that it actually led the people to believe the posts more because they believed that the entity flagging the post was the deep state or some corrupting evil one. And so it was a signal that this is really what you ought to believe. So we've got to do two things at the same time. It's like develop the technology to help us understand what's true and false, and then deploy it in a way that's sensitive to the psychology of the audience so that it doesn't have this backfiring effect of producing exactly the opposite.
Well, that's a very great point. So in fact, technology needs to be, we need two sides of the technology, partly for detecting and identifying bad or good information, and partly for persuasion. So your point about hacking the brains is very interesting because how do we hack the brains so that they are more willing to, absorb good information, because that's definitely against human nature, okay? And on the other hand, I also believe AI should play a much more important role in education as a person is growing up and learning about the world, and how can we better prepare a person for the world with a lot of AI, and not just the fact that AI may take certain simple jobs away, but also the fact that AI can help produce many bad information much more quickly and much more difficult to detect. Okay, so the idea of inoculate the process and also inoculate the people. We need to prepare our citizens to become better information consumers. So in our lab, instead of trying to flag the information, which is definitely not well received, we simply build a mechanism to secretly slow down the transmission of the information. So essentially, if we consider a particular information has the probability of being harmful, we add an arbitrary, weight for, when you click on like and when you click on share. Okay, so that effectively can slow down the spread of information. So the people may complain about the server, but they are not aware. Okay, so okay. Yeah.
I think that's a very interesting point. I just want to echo Professor Lessett's talk. Said I think that's research article in Science, which they worked together with Facebook. And so I think the researcher actually found out that people believe what they believe. If you happen to be on one side, then you tend to believe the information from that side. But interesting, there is the consequence is they don't change their voting behavior at all. They just vote whatever they want, even they see the new information. It doesn't change their behavior. So I think the psychology also is very important. That how are you going to actually change the attitude of the new information or misinformation is very crucial. But talking about that, I think that for the civil participation from the civil society also can help. We have two person, a researcher from the both are the co-sponsor of the very famous GOV0. They help is a very famous nonprofit organization which helped the civil, the individual to understand about the government regulation, also to help them to participate, to organize the big data and help the people to understand more about the government. So why don't we just start with, I think Isabel, right? She's currently the Secretary General of the Taiwan AI Academy. And so can you just share with us some of your experience and to see whether it's possible that we can actually to tame the AI through the help of the civil society?
Yeah, okay. I think first we might start teaching Morse code at AI Academy. After I listened to Lauren's speech. There are many things. I want to talk about the challenge first. Among a lot of bad things that I think AI or generative AI might bring to us, I think one of the things I worry about most is the dependency on an AI. Yeah, because I think it's very powerful of AI technology. When we started the AI Academy, we want to give access to common people, the access to the AI technology. So we start by teaching people how to build a model and provide a lot of lessons to these engineers who already worked in the industry for many years. But now we started to feel not very comfortable about teaching alone the technology because engineers really don't care about the risk and the ethic and the legal issues. So in the annual conference last Saturday, that's the first time we tried to provide AI on humanity track to the participants. And I think many of the speakers provide many good insights to the audience, especially Professor Lessig. I think a lot of them were shocked by the speech, and because I think in the following panel, one of the question is how should we just shrink the gap? There is a gap between norm and the common practice at the site, and they started to realize they should try to take care of this risk and maybe think about twice of what they are doing now, because I think the whole world is just in a very serious competition about the AI technology. So they will provide a lot of advanced technology, and this technology will just not only people might start to outsource what our brain could do, to AI. So maybe we will compromise the independent thinking ability. So it's kind of that's a basic thing for the democracy. So that's what I care about most. And also, I think the generative AI will create a lot of content, and which will be very attractive to people and the young generation. So when people has a lot of things to do, they actually don't want to spend their time in public affairs. So even we try to do the experiment of practicing democracy in the past 10 years in GovZero community, but the most difficult thing is to invite people to join, because there are so many other options and choices. They can go shopping and do a lot of other interesting things. Why people will care about this? It's always a mystery to me. So I think I was just worried about, we can use AI to maybe lower the barriers of participation for civic society, but I think the core issue is should we be more aggressive about limits of use of AI, like for young generations? We talked about that yesterday. I don't want, that's a example in China, like they put the limits on the young kids using the game, playing the game, online games. It's kind of political incorrect here, but as a parent of 3 kids, I would say we do need this kind of regulation or rules to set up norms, for the kids, or it just takes too much energy, and also is kind of impossible for individual families to just deal with these kinds of issues. I think I will stop here and maybe get some feedback from Professor Lessig.
Yeah, so Isabel and I have already bonded on our common parenting experience. And I can tell you that in the United States, the one thing Americans like China about is American parents who learn what China is doing to empower parents to restrict their children's access to technology. When you describe to an American that there are actually 2 TikToks, there's the one that we have, which constantly feeds content that kids can't resist and participate in, and it's the worst kind of content imaginable. And there's a Chinese TikTok, which restricts the amount of time they use TikTok and when they can use TikTok, and tries to get kids to want to be astronauts as opposed to social influencers. I mean, seriously, the number one thing kids 12 to 15 in America want to be, you ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? The answer is social influencer, yes. Which to most people my age, they don't even know what that means. But the point is, that's a product of this technology. Yes. And when you recognize that China's actually decided they want to protect their kids, it's the one thing Americans kind of like China for.
That's one thing I like China for. Yeah, it's hard to tell anyone else, but I just told my children this is something correct. Chinese government have to.
But the other point is what you started with is I completely agree. We have got to facilitate a way for policymakers and technologists to talk to each other. In the United States government, there's a really terrible way in which technology is kind of put at the bottom of the stack, as if it's, like paper clips or Xerox machines, as opposed to an integral part of how policy is made. And on the other side, it's very hard to get technologists to realize the values that are implicated by their technology. I described to Isabel yesterday, the first time I began talking about the relationship between technology and policy, I made a presentation, and these were in the days where we had transparencies. So I had actually done on a transparency the relationship between law and technology, and how technological choices implicated values, and the technologists needed to take responsibility for that. And a woman came up to me, literally crying, and she says, I am a programmer. I am not a policymaker. I don't want to have to think about values when I'm programming. And I said, I'm sorry, but the reality is your programs implicate values. And we need to be able to have that conversation and that awareness, and nobody should be allowed to say, I just build the bombs, where they land is not my issue, because that is the fundamental flaw with technical thinking throughout history.
Thank you.
So let's welcome the last one. I think the Dr. Gao, and he has a CL. And he has slides. Do you want to use the slide for?
Sure.
Yeah. Sure.
So actually, I'm student to Professor Xi like 25 years ago. I remember. Yeah, I dropped out, so I'm not a doctor, right? Yeah.
So if you have a kid like him, the safe TikTok, it does not work.
Yeah. So yeah, I recall vividly. It was like I was freshman, and then I took this AI class, which is meant for I think semaphore or so, right? And then the first question I asked after the class to Professor Xu was like, "Hey, how do we get this machine to actually think? How do we program this?" Yeah, 25 years later, we're here with this LLM stuff, right? So I have a kind of unique background here as a technologist that was hands-on with that, and then also activist building GovZero, the community, and also a startup founder who's is, well, interested in the AI and the data infra sector. So, well, as Professor Lessig mentioned, well, democracy was already hacked right before this wave of AI, right, by the corporate, the analog democracy and the digital democracy of the kind of engagement optimization. So why are we here? Why are we talking about this right now? So we're not talking about like sentient AI, like interspecies word yet, right? That was fun to think about. But if that was true, they kind of succeeded tricking the humans into the crypto bubble, so that builds a lot of the GPU to power the current AI. But let's not talk about that. Right, let's focus on the LLM-based AI right now, right? Because this is the new challenge and opportunity we're facing today. So actually, we have to know it, like what is it, right? So really, the current LLM are probability models, just predict the next world, right? And then why they are so powerful? Because, well, they've been around for quite a while, since the 50s, language modeling, and then embedding, and also the kind of vector database enabling processing more data. But the reason they're so powerful and so anticipated from the AI field that large language model becomes kind of the powerful AI, apart from everything else, is really like language and storytelling is evolution advantage of our species. Homo sapien like thrive on languages because they're very good at telling stories. Right? Telling story like, hey, there's a dangerous lion across the river, don't go there. So we survived. So LLM kind of is a very interesting way because it produced this intermediate medium that we think, so that augments us, right? So we need to understand this first to see where the threats come from. And then this is so powerful because they are kind of stateless building block, which means you need, right now, still a lot of computation power, but unlike the previous generation AI, you don't, previous generation of AI, you don't need to kind of specialize every model. You have a generic model that can do a lot of things. So that's the scary part, right? So here I want to see like, okay, what is the actual challenges and threat to democracy from this kind of AI, right? First is really what we talk about canvas. So like, kind of already mentioned the Cambridge Analytica targeted campaign to people. Right? But this can be a lot more sophisticated. We think about, like Isabel, you have like 3 kids, right? And then, okay, what does mom care about, right? Oh, you want to restrict the kids' online time, right? Look how well China is doing, right? So you have a bot conversing with you like that, targeted everyone's preferences. So I think this is the real threat, right? And then the other thing is that what builds into the model as the default, as like our panel chair, Amin, was setting the agenda with ChatGPT, right? So what if all the agenda setting was kind of implicit with some default? You just ignore some value, and then we take that for granted, right? So I think these two are the most imminent danger for this current genre of AI, right? But we need, like Lessig said, not this one, something like also the opportunity. So one of the interesting things, like after doing GovZero, is really it's really debate tech. How do we get people to agree on something with assisted technology? So there are lots of experiments. We did it in GovZero, like Polis, and then like in Turkey, there's like a tool to map the argument. And also with Professor Chen, a couple of years ago, we did a project, try to do like AI augmented deliberation, though AI wasn't available at that time. But I think there's a kind of a pioneer way. But what I want to emphasize is really echoing what Professor Lessig said. We need something that's worse but unique. All right, worse is in quoted. Representative democracy is kind of like the best way we have right now, but what is the kind of less efficient way, but unique way? And then on the technology part, what is the worst AI models but unique, everyone can use with their own knowledge that augment their understanding of the issues. So I think this is one thing that I'm more on kind of like we need to enable the new generation of builders, right? So a lot of people who are not computer scientists, we need to allow them to build tools that help themselves to help others. So the last thing is really also echoing because you mentioned like how the Enlightenment period is actually how where modern democracy was born, right? And then we need to think about that at that period, really, democracy wasn't the only thing the intellectual seek. It's the rationality and then science, which lead to the quest of, okay, how do we actually govern ourselves? So thinking about it, map to today, what is the equivalent to intellectual at that period, right? As 2023 is super interesting, it's still self-unfolding sci-fi kind of thing. So I think like this is kind of my question. How do we enable the new builder to think about all this, like how do we govern ourselves? And this is the future we'll have to choose. Is it more Star Wars or Star Trek?
So what I love about that question is that it embeds an important ambiguity, which is who's the we. So last night I had the privilege of meeting with the GovZero community, and you know, I guess there were 20 people that. It's an extraordinary mix of incredible talent, technically incredibly competent, but more important to me was the voracious appetite for policy understanding and how that influences what the technology should be. And it's the magic of producing that desire in technologists that I think is our greatest hope. Like if we can find a way to bring them in and encourage them to participate in that conversation, then we have the beginnings of the right mix. Then you got to work on the lawyers. Yeah. Well, I mean, you've done a lot here, but like I'll describe at the same time that I was just beginning to write about this. I went to France, and I gave a talk at a big conference with lawyers, and I talked about the relationship between code and law and how you need to recognize the connection and if you're going to protect the values of law. And said I was taken to dinner with the head of the Bar Association and sat down next to him, and I handed him my card. Not typically what Americans do, but very familiar over here, but I handed him my card. And he picked it up and he crumbled it up and he threw it on the floor. And he said, "I'm not a technologist. I am a lawyer." And he stood up and he walked out. Now, that was kind of extreme, but it's not an extreme response of lawyers. Because in fact, lawyers don't want to understand anything about the technology. Like they think they know their truth when they know the deep structure of legal thinking. And we've got to break that. So what's really exciting about what's happening here is I think you've already broken that. I think you have a digital ministry, which is like which is that instantiated in a really dramatic way. And I think that needs to be a model for what happens in the rest of the world.
Can I give some feedback? Yes. First, I think a lot of lawyers in Taiwan are interested in take part in the technology decision-making thing. And second, I was always wondering who should take ownership of this citizen participation in the policy decision-making thing. Because I think it's kind of, in many cases, it's kind of, there is a wonderful example of GovZero and the government collaborated together during the pandemic. But that's in the pandemic. And there's a very urgent situation. But in daily life, there's no such kind of a mechanism embedded already. So should we work on this? Yeah.
I'm very intrigued by the discussion. And one reason why I brought up, maybe using AI to help coach the future generation of citizens is partly because your mention of, many of these technology is the science of attention. And the fact that in our upbringing, most of the time, we focus our attention on our future job, the training for that job. And so for me, growing up trained in technology, we did not take much humanities courses. I think I slept through all my classes in history and whatever, okay? And so it is very natural for the engineers to say, I'm not interested in policy making, and I cannot do it, and I don't understand, and I don't have time for that. But I think it is extremely important in our time that we need to bring the awareness to everyone that, you really need to cross the boundary to get information from the other side. Sometimes I use the hearings or at the Congress of the tech companies as my entertainment, because they ask really stupid questions, and it's. I don't think they did that on purpose, but it's really a fact that most of us do not really understand the other side. So it is extremely important for us to broaden our informational space so that we can at least understand what the issue is. Yeah.
Okay, I think we only have 10 minutes left. And so why don't we just open the floor so you can continue to ask the question about the, okay, go ahead.
Professor Leslie, thank you for your excellent lecture and panel. I want to ask, does Professor understand the democracy in the deliberated term that people need to participate in the public sphere and discuss and deliberate and be informed and make choice? Because some argument or realistic view of democracy will argue that the democracy is not hacked because people want this. So the success of AI show that people want to be a passive consumer of the information. They lie in the bed and watch TikToks, and rather than being the active participant. And the second question is, in your article, you argue that the First Amendment doesn't protect the replicant. So I wonder whether the generative AI, the content of generative AI is not protected, is also not protected by the First Amendment. Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a really important ambiguity in the claim that people need to be deliberative and participate in their democracy. And the ambiguity is how often? right? There are many people who speak about democracy as if people need to all the time be focused on government and what the government is doing and policy choices. That's a nightmare. It's the worst life imaginable. I mean, there are policy geeks who like it, you know, maybe 100. But the rest of the world wants to get on with their lives. They've got families, they've got hobbies, they've got jobs. They don't want to spend all their time thinking about that. So I think the important thing about deliberative democracy is to recognize the value of sortition in the middle of it, which is, okay, live your life, but we're going to randomly select you and bring you together and give you what you need to think about and ask you to deliberate about that for a period of time. And then what you do in that process of deliberation will have democratic significance. And you might say, well, how often are we going to be summoned? What's really interesting about early juries in America is that in, for example, Philadelphia in the 1800s, the average citizen who could be called for a jury, which of course was just a white male, but the average white male adult in Philadelphia was summoned to 3 juries every year. 3 times a year they sat and they listened to a case and they deliberated and they gave a judgment. And that activity is incredibly enhancing of civic understanding and service. And so what I would dream about deliberative democracy is that maybe not 3 times a year, but maybe at least once every 3 years, or maybe once every year, everybody would be pulled into one of these conversations and they would begin to get a sense of what that practice of democracy could be. With respect to, so I've argued that we've got to recognize a continuum of intelligence, and at some point, these devices become like replicants in Blade Runner sense, and when they become replicants, they no longer are the expression of the coders who wrote them. So, you know, you might feel about your 3-year-old or your 5-year-old that you are the parent and you're controlling what they do, but when they become 20, what they say is theirs. It's not mine anymore. Like my son, I mean, you know, if my son wanted to be a Republican, you know, he doesn't, but if my son did, that would be him. It wouldn't be me. And so I think the same thing with technology. But what follows from that is simply that these technologies don't presumptively have First Amendment protection that runs with them. So the government should presumptively be able to regulate them, just like they can regulate cars and say that cars have to have brakes in them. And that it's not they can regulate them in any way they want, so you can't regulate them and say no Republican speech is allowed. That would violate the First Amendment, even though they don't themselves have First Amendment rights. But I do think we need to open up the space for democratic innovation and experimentation with these technologies rather than presumptively pushing them off the democratic stage by saying, well, the First Amendment protects everything that they do.
Okay, we have one more question in the back and one in the front.
Thank you, Professor Lessig and all the panelists. My name is Andy. Actually, it's a follow-up to Ms. Ho's question. Both Professor Lessig and Professor Xu, you have highlighted the absence of a check-balance mechanism or transparency in AI operations. Given this, my question is, whom do you believe that we should primarily rely on to initiate and develop these mechanisms or a safe AI you just mentioned? Should we urge our government, but you just say they are like clowns in the Congress, or should we anticipate it from the general public? But you also just mentioned that people are not that willing to dive in such complicated technologies, and even some of them have been severely influenced by manipulated information. Or should we rely on certain groups? I mean, like expert, like GovZero, or like even those big tech companies, but they all have bias and might not be that fair. So I'm eager to hear your perspectives on this matter. Thank you so much.
I'll let Professor Lessig answer the hard part, and I will answer from a technology point of view. You know, we typically do not have much thinking in terms of check and balance. But on the other hand, I think being a technologist, one thing that we should do is trying to have multiple tools that will come up with the answer, and you kind of can double check the answer in a way that's kind of like a majority opinion. But most importantly, for a technology point of view, it is important to make technology more transparent, because at this point, it is so complicated that most people do not even understand why the machine gives you certain answer or why it behaves the way it behaves. And many people, even who the creators or the users of this technology, try to get away by hand waving. So, oh, I don't really know how it gave you that answer either. But I think that is totally irresponsible. So we need to demand transparency in terms of the data, in terms of the algorithm, and in terms of even, extreme cases where we want to be able to examine the technology in more detail. Yeah.
I think I completely agree with that. And I would add one change, which I think would be very valuable. And that is that engineers live within professional societies that impose ethical obligations on them that they're not allowed to violate while maintaining their status as engineers, just like lawyers. So this is too detailed to understand what's happening in the United States right now, but if you watch the lawyers around Donald Trump as he tries to defend what he's doing, there are many times that Donald Trump says something that his lawyers will not repeat, because his lawyers are bound by an ethical obligation, and they can't lie. They can't say things they know are false. And so when Donald Trump says it, he's free because he's just, Donald Trump. But the lawyers can't, and they can't participate in advancing a fraudulent strategy. And now, I'm not saying that all lawyers live up to those obligations, but the very best do. And one thing we saw when we looked at the Facebook files, I actually represented Frances Haugen in the first stages of her coming out as the Facebook whistleblower. One thing we saw in the Facebook files was, though there are many really ethical engineers who were trying to tell Facebook what Facebook needed to do to avoid these technologies becoming, addictive in ways that led to suicide or destructive of democracy, they would say what they thought had to happen. They then would be told by management, no, we're going to do this anyway. And they had no recourse against that. But if they had an ethical obligation as engineers, then they, like Donald Trump's lawyers, at a certain point would be able to say, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I can't do that consistent with my ethical obligations as engineers. And that would begin to produce a constraint on the engineering side, similar to the constraint that exists on the lawyer side, to make it harder for companies to steer the technologies in ways that are obviously harmful or destructive. Now, engineers aren't going to like that obligation. It's easier just to follow the orders you're given, than it is to think about, geez, is this really consistent with my ethical obligation? But the whole point is, if code is law, then the obligations of coders should be the same as the obligations of lawyers. They can't act in ways that are clearly unethical in each of these domains. And if we had that principle, it wouldn't solve the hard question that you've set up, like what's the mechanism, but it would make it harder for the system to support the most extreme type of destructions that we've seen technology support.
Okay, I think we have one more final question.
Hi, Professor Lessig. I'm Yo Hao. I'm also the research fellow for the Research Institute for Democracy, Society, and Emerging Technology, which you say...
You had to read it. You
didn't
say it.
I have to look at it and read it. And I'm also an alumnus of your school. I just graduated I just graduated this year. And what I want to ask is, following your speech, I think you are claiming that democracy has been hacked by the combination of AAIs and DAIs. And if I understand correctly, I think the root cause of this democratic crisis is still AAIs, namely corporations. because the AIs are just performing what corporations train them to do. For example, the recommendation algorithms of social media is aiming to maximize engagement, but the ultimate goal of this function is still to maximize profits for corporations. So after that, you propose two potential solutions. One is to bolster citizen participation, and the other is to utilize technological means to address the problem created by technology itself. But what I'm thinking is, it seems like you haven't addressed the core issue, the power of corporations and the markets in your solution. So what I'm asking is, are you implying that it is possible to fix the corrupted democratic system caused by AI without tackling the problematic business models and external costs it imposed on our democracy? Or could you provide further insights into how we can regulate or govern these AAIs or corporations to shape a better AI future? That's my question. Thank you.
I think it's more polite if the hardest question is not the last. So let me try. So some people look at that story and say the problem is corporations or capitalism or the whole system and we have to blow it all up. I'm not that kind of participant. I think the problem with corporations is that they're not effectively regulated. So you're exactly right. We've got corporations that are, in the social media context, deploying a strategy of maximizing engagement, because that turns out to be an extremely profitable technology. I mean, they print money at Facebook. It's an unbelievable amount of money they make from the engagement they facilitate through their technologies. If we had a well-functioning government, then I look at that problem and say, okay, engagement as a business model has an externality for society. So let's tax that externality. Let's imagine an engagement tax. Imagine a quadratic engagement tax. So like if you're engaged for an hour with a technology, then the company doesn't have to pay a tax. But if you're engaged with 2 hours, then they begin to have to pay a tax. And then you engage at 3 hours, it's that tax squared. So you see a increasing tax that has to be paid for the user engaging in the technology. Very quickly, the companies would stop trying to get you to engage for 7 or 8 hours every day. It wouldn't be worth it to them. So the point is, if we had a rational government that identified the problem and began to engage in the ways that government can, which I don't think should be regulating the technology, but instead creating the economic environment to make it so they don't want to behave in a way that's harmful to society, we could achieve both corporations and technology without the harmful effect of the technology. Just like in the environmental context, you have companies that want to produce energy for a society. If it's the cheapest way, they will burn coal to produce energy for the society. If coal produces an externality, which it does, that's a controversial in the United States, controversial view in the United States, but I think here people accept that carbon in the environment is an externality to the environment. The rational governmental response to that is to tax the externality. So we should tax the production of carbon. And then the companies will begin to think, how do we produce energy without having to pay that tax? Because they don't want to pay the tax. So they will adopt technologies that are not carbon-producing technologies. It's the same game in every dimension. The problem in the United States is we just don't have a functioning government. And so I would like to get a functioning government to solve these problems rather than blowing up capitalism. I mean, it might make sense to blow up capitalism. If I were 20, I might think about that, right? but I'm kind of too old to think about such revolutionary changes when it seems to me there are less revolutionary things we could do that would solve at least the problem as I see the problem to be. But thank you for that question.
Okay, I think the time's up then, so I think thanks all the panelists in this discussion, particularly Professor Lessig. Let's give a big hands to all the Okay. That's the end of today's panel discussion, and I hope you can continue to join in the afternoon.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to invite all our panelists and our moderator to come forward to the stage for a group picture, while also asking Professor Chen Dongshen to join in the picture. Welcome. And the second one with your thumbs up. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Let's all give it up to our speakers once again. Thank you very much, especially to Professor Lessig. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes AI and Democracy, Challenges and Opportunities. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a pleasant day and see you next time. Thank you.